the cornflower sizing. Oh, that's definitely gone black. Hello, and welcome to an investigative millinery science video. My name is Ilona, I am a milliner based in London, and today I'm exploring blocking net. The goal is to make a turban in the next couple of weeks using this mysterious blocking net as the base. This foundation material is also known as Paris net or Dior net, and I'm going to do my best to not use those terms interchangeably, as historically speaking there are slight technical differences. I'd like to cover a few things today. Number 1, what is blocking net? Number 2, what are its uses? Number 3, why can't we buy any of it right now? Number 4, possible substitutes. And number 5, a personal challenge, can I recreate it? And I'm very nervous about that last one because I think I might be overextending myself. I'd also like to say that I'm not an expert on this topic. I've done my best to conduct research responsibly and from reputable sources. If you think I've got something wrong or have more information for me, please be kind and let me know in the comments. Now, grab your lab coat and let's get started. Before we start, here's some terminology that I will be using throughout this video. When I refer to something as having sizing, all I mean is that it has been stiffened with something. Don't confuse netting with veiling. Netting is what we are talking about today, and veiling is this stuff that can be used as a hat trimming. In the UK, we use cornflour and cornstarch interchangeably. However, in the US, they are two distinct separate substances. Today, I'm exclusively talking about starchy things. So for my American viewers, every time I say cornflour, know that I mean cornstarch. That's language out of the way, so what exactly is blocking net? Well, it's a cotton foundation material that has a simple mesh weave, making it perfect for soft foundation hats, or to reinforce woven straw hats. In the past, there were many types of blocking net with different names that all meant slightly different things. Today, these terms are generally used interchangeably. Most frequently, blocking net today is called Paris or Dior net. If you want to know the differences in some of these nets, here's a still. Pause the video here and have a read. Now, what is its purpose and where is it used? Surprisingly, it has many more applications than I thought. The most popular use by far is as a turban foundation. Its flexible properties make it perfect for soft fabric hats, as it gives structure without rigidity and weight. My favourite thing is that you can pack a blocking net hat into a suitcase without needing to take a hat box. Just stuff it with a few t-shirts and it will keep the shape well enough. The other millinery application is to reinforce woven straw hats, just like inside this vintage Edna Wallace bubble hat. I myself have recently used it inside this blue straw hat. If I prod an area of the hat with and without the blocking net, you can see the difference that it makes to the structure. Finer versions of blocking net are used as wig-making foundations, although it is a struggle to find some that are cotton. Sometimes it's even used in bookbinding to support the spine. Where is all the blocking net? Why can't we buy any at the moment? Well, it's the same old story as with every other extinct millinery material. There was a factory that manufactured it, but they had to close. I spoke to a UK-based distributor of blocking net, and they said that the fabric itself isn't a problem to reproduce. It's the finishing process that is difficult. The finishing process involves the stiffening of the netting fabric, although unfortunately they couldn't tell me what that entailed. Which brings me to my next question. Can I recreate blocking net at home? The answer to that? Well, let's see how I got on. Welcome to my lab. I ordered in the post a few different options of fabrics that I thought would look the closest to blocking net. First package here says open here. Oh, I was not expecting it to be quite like this. This is the first option. And obviously I've never seen it close up, but I've heard of what this is. And what this is cotton bobbinet. I ordered a whole meter just because I figured if I'm going to order it, I might as well order a lot because the other use for this is in corset making, and I figured if I can't use it to do a hat, then I'll just make a corset from it. It has got quite a fine weave. They look like little hexagons. Very small compared to this blocking net. As you can see, the bobbinet is so much finer than the blocking net. I think that's probably going to have to be a corset. I don't even know if I want to waste any on trying to make it starchy and blocking net-like. Next parcel. This is the one I'm most excited about. I think it's come from Germany. Yes, it has come from Germany because it says Frau Ilona. That's rather fun. Ooh. Ooh. Oh, this looks much more promising. They've used normal tulle as a packaging material. I like that. Oh, I have a use for this. I actually need to make a crinoline skirt for a dress that I'm working on as well. So this is going to come in very useful. Yay! Chocolate. That won't be for me. I don't eat chocolate. Husband! Would you like a chocolate?
Oh, yes, please. Thank you very much.
This looks like it's the one. Ooh. Oh, it feels very stiff. Yes. Yeah, okay. I think I can already spot one difference between this and the original blocking net that I have. And actually, well, two differences. The first difference being that obviously it's a smaller weave, but it is that diagonal weave that is what I am looking for. But the difference is that this blocking net that I got ages ago, I think is a 3-strand blocking net. So the weave is 3-stranded. It looks similar. It has enough, it's got that same amount of stretch, I think. It's not got the stretch all the ways. It's obviously not going to stretch on the bias, as it were, because the way it's woven is it's already woven on a diagonal. So it's stretching on the cross and on the lengthwise because of the way it's knitted. I am rather pleased. Lovely. I'm glad I have a whole metre of this. I probably don't need to order this again for another 2 years because when you're making a foundation using this, you don't actually use all that much, but we'll get onto that in a little bit. This brings me onto the next part of my experiment, which I am most excited about. I want to find out if the blocking net over here that I purchased a while ago is stiffened with a cornstarch based stiffener. So my thinking is I need to test for starch. And what do we use to test for starch? Iodine solution. Now, I had to remind myself of exactly how this worked, so I went on Google and looked up on BBC Bitesize exactly how you're supposed to use the iodine solution, and this is what's supposed to happen. The iodine solution itself is red-brown, and in the presence of starch, it goes to a blue-black colour. So I thought we'd test various items. I have got a bit of lemon, which I think should contain no starch at all, so that's kind of like my control. Then I've got some rice, which obviously should contain starch, so that should turn blue-black. Then I've got some straight up corn flour powder. Then I've got some corn flour that I have dissolved into water and made it into a stiffening sizing paste already. And then obviously I've got my bit of blocking net. This is my iodine solution. If you're going to try this, just be very careful. This stains. You won't get the stains out of clothing or anything like that. Try not to get it on your hands. It will stain your hands. So I'm going to drop it onto the lemon now. That's definitely staying red. I made a mess. Let's try the rice. That's gone black. I need a pokey stick. For my pokey stick, I'm using a toothpick. that rice, oh yes, that is definitely black rice. Okay, right, corn flour. It smells medicinal. The corn flour sizing. Oh, that's definitely gone black. Moment of truth. It's going to be rather anticlimactic if it turns out that it doesn't go blue-black. I'm just going to completely douse it. I have no other use for this. I think that has gone black. It's definitely black, so it's definitely using a starch-based sizing. So I wanted to comment on something that I thought was very interesting in my control experiment over here. And it's this sample over here, which is the uncooked cornstarch. There it is. Can you see how that actually looks slightly brown? It's still on the black side, but it's not as blue-black as this, which is very obviously, oh, matches my nail polish, which is very blue-black, which is the cooked starch. So I think cooking the starch is what's making it have that starchy property more than just the plain corn flour without adding water and without applying heat. So I thought that was a very interesting thing to note over here. Let me clean all this up and we'll head over to my kitchen. Welcome to my kitchen. The plan today is to do 2 experiments. The first experiment will just be plain white cornstarch, as though I was going to stiffen a ruff or a collar or something like that. And the second experiment is to mix some dye solution in with the corn flour mixture before applying it to my fabric.
To make the starch stiffener, you will need 1 part corn flour to 8 parts of water. 10 grams of corn flour to 80 milliliters of water is enough to starch a 50 by 50 centimeter square of fabric. A mixture of corn flour and water is known as a suspension. When you mix the corn flour with the water, it suspends. As soon as you stop mixing, the mixture separates and the corn sinks to the bottom. It is important to therefore mix your corn flour with cold water and only apply heat once the mixture is fully mixed. This should avoid any lumps. Keep stirring continuously until the mixture becomes more translucent and jelly-like. You are looking for it to reach the consistency of a thick curd or custard. When the corn flour is heated with water, the corn flour granules swell and burst. This process is known as gelatinization.
Now that my starch is all mixed up and ready, it's time to actually cover my netting in it. The first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that your netting is already wet or damp.
Submerge the damp netting into the starch mix. You will need to do this while the starch is still warm. You can wear rubber gloves to prevent your hands from burning. Work the starch into the fabric by agitating it. Squeeze out any excess.
Now that my net is all submerged and coated in the starch solution, it's time to dry it out. And the best way to do that is on a poupée head or on the block form that you will be eventually using the net on. In my case, I want to make a turban foundation, so I've got my poupée head right over here. This is Anne. And I'm going to stretch the blocking net over Anne as if I was just using normal blocking net that I didn't starch myself.
This bit turned out to be rather tricky and sticky. In hindsight, I recommend not worrying too much about pinning it down. Just drape it over your block to dry out until the stickiness disappears. And then at that point you can shape it with steam, but we'll get onto that later. So, what's happening here? How does the actual process of starching work to stiffen the fabric? Cotton fibres are hollow in construction and covered in tiny hairs or filaments. Successful starching occurs when the starch grains find their way into the hollow fibres or wedge themselves securely into the finer filaments surrounding the fibres. These grains then expand when heat is added, and this is what causes the stiffness.
There we go, all blocked, and for extra security I'm going to pop a rubber band on the outside of the pins just to make sure it's all held in place.
In the future, I'd like to experiment with wheat and rice starch to make the starch paste, as due to their medium and small grain sizes respectively, it might give a different effect. Wheat starch is recommended for table linens and rice starch is recommended for hats, collars and shirts. Cornstarch has the largest grain size and is notable for giving less gloss than other starches.
The other thing I'm going to do is to save my starch solution for just in case if this dries and it's not stiff enough, I can just brush a little bit more on. It will keep in the fridge for 2 to 3 days. Moving on to experiment number 2. The first thing I need to do is to dye my blocking net. So come over here. I'm following the same process as I did in my Jacquard acid dyes video. I'll put a link to that in the card at the top right. Here's a simple order of operations for what I did. Measure all the quantities, dissolve the citric acid, add the dye to the water, submerge the damp fabric, boil it for a bit, wash under running cold water until it runs clear. This was my attempt at dyeing the blocking net, and it's supposed to be a light pink, and there is a hint of pink, but it really didn't take the dye as well as I thought it should. That could either be a problem with my dye solution because it's a little old, or it could just be that the net comes coated in something that's preventing it from taking on the dye. I also wanted to test the shrinkage percent of the net, and it's negligible, it's like 2%, so I don't think you have to worry about the net shrinking so much, and I did boil it for a very long time. So shrinking not a problem, but taking on the dye, quite problematic.
What I've done to remedy this is that I've measured out a new batch of corn flour to make some more starching solution. But instead of using plain cold water, I've used the water from my pink dye bath once it had cooled down. As I'm using the chemical acid dyes, I'm making sure to follow all the safety guidance. This includes not using pans and cutlery that I would use for food. Remember, any implement that comes into contact with the dye stock will not be food safe again. Just like with the plain white corn flour, I'm continuously stirring on a low heat and waiting for the mixture to turn transparent and gel-like.
I'm ready to try and starch this now. I've got a standard crown block over here. I've got my pink starch solution over here. And in an attempt to not get my ironing board mucky, I've also got a little bit of cling film down here to collect any drips. I put some cling film over my crown block. It's exactly the same process as before. I need to coat this in the starch and stretch it over my block. It's so pink. Okay, this isn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. Much easier on my poupée head. Try it a different way. I'm going to spread this out onto my cling film first and then put the cling film onto the block. If you are enjoying my millinery endeavours, please consider liking and subscribing. This really helps me grow and reach a larger audience.
I have also made sure to unroll the edges of the fabric so that I can use them later.
I didn't want to use steam on this because apparently steam will take the stiffness out of the starch, but I think because it's so sticky and difficult to block at the moment, I'm going to just leave it to dry like this without putting in any pins, and once it's dry enough I can take the corners in and pull on it a little bit more with the tiniest amount of steam, but not too much.
When it comes to cleaning up, don't pour any leftovers down your sink as it can clog it up. Just put it into the bin. Use plain water to wash up your pans and utensils.
My white blocking net on Anne is dry, so it's time to give that some shaping. I've got my iron set on the highest dry setting, and what the heat is going to do is hopefully set the starch in a bit and kind of activate it. Here's how to take a head measurement. The area you want to measure is your front to back, and your side to side. You've also got to decide exactly how you might want your turban or whatever hat you're making to sit. For example, do you want it to cover your ears? Do you want it to sit above your ear? How far forward do you want it to go? How far back should it go? But the measurement that you absolutely must take is just your standard hairline measurement from the front to the back. I'm placing the tape measure in line with my hairline and then down the back of my head, and then I'm feeling for the bit where my skull ends and my neck begins. There's a little divot there, you can feel it with your finger. And for my ear-to-ear measurement, I actually want the turban to sit further forwards on my face. So I'm not going to take the measurement from the top of my ear, but from the bottom of my ear down here. Taking the tape measure around the back of my head like this, and that is about 38 centimeters on me. So I need to find the center. Place that on the center top of Anne. And the next thing to do is to start taking the pins out, but I'm going to leave the elastic band in place. Then I'm going to use the elastic band to help me draw a nice smooth circle around the head. When it comes to taking the net off the block, I'm going to take it off with the cling film underneath because that will help me keep the shape without deforming it and stretching and pulling at it as I pull it off. Remember to make sure that your front and back are marked on. It's really not very stiff at all, but I'm going to cut off the excess and put that to one side, not throw it away. Shall we try her on? I'm very pleased with how that fits. Let me show you the back. There's just a little bit of excess over here that I can definitely afford to cut off. I'm just going to bend it back on myself and then potentially just smooth out this line over here. There we go, all cut out. I'm going to try it on again. That feels a lot better now. The next step is to create a binding for the edge. Now, a turban base doesn't require any wire because you want it to be flexible, but what it does need is a bound edge to help it hold its shape, otherwise the net will deform over time. That's why we kept the offcuts, because this is what I'm going to use to make the edge.
To make the band, use the offcuts from earlier. You will need to make it about 5 centimeters wide and as long as the measurement at the circumference of your blocking net foundation. Once you've got it cut out, pull it firmly to take the stretch out. Fold it in half lengthwise and iron it. My offcuts weren't quite long enough to stretch the whole circumference length, so I sewed a few lengths together. Then attach the binding to the outside of the foundation and sew it as if you were sewing a bias binding onto a dress. And yes, I am sewing over my pins. That was very naughty of me, don't do that. You will need to fold the binding over and tuck the edge under, once again, just like a bias binding on a dress. And top stitch that in place. I'm using a stitch length of 3 and a size 70 needle. At this point, I decided my net wasn't stiff enough, so I decided to smear more starch stiffener over it. This was a bad idea. Don't do this, I'll explain why later. But this did confirm that using starch which was made a few hours before was still possible if you heat it gently in the microwave to loosen it up. Moving on to the pink dyed blocking net. I wanted to use this second foundation to see how well the starch held up to steaming. Let's use this opportunity to briefly recap all the steps. As the quote goes, repetition is the mother of learning. Number 1. Block the net. Use a minimum amount of steam so as not to remove the starch. Number 2. Use the offcuts to make a binding. The binding is 5 cm wide and as long as the circumference of your foundation. Pull the band to take the stretch out. Number 3. Use a hot, dry iron to activate the starch some more. Number 4. Measure your head and mark these measurements onto your foundation before taking it off the block and cutting off the excess. Number 5. Sew the band to the foundation as if it was a bias binding for a dress. And you're all done. 5 steps and you have a turban or a soft hat foundation. As for my last experiment, I'm blocking some lightweight buckram, which is the recommended substitute for blocking net. I'm personally not too fond of this as a substitute, but we'll come on to that in the evaluation.
Moving on to evaluating my results. The white and pink blocking net didn't stiffen as much as the original blocking net. I think this is because of the 2-stranded nature of the fabric compared to the 3-stranded weave of the original. This means that there aren't as many cotton fibres for the starch to get into in my version. The fix for this is to keep looking for net fabrics that are a little thicker, since making my experiments, these samples have arrived in the post. I wanted to show them to you because they are too thick and unusable. These samples have just arrived in the post and they would be perfect if only they were cotton, but because these are wig foundations, they are nylon, and also they don't quite stretch in all the directions. They stretch side to side, not quite up and down, and no stretch, not a lot of stretch on the diagonal there. They've also got these ones that are quite like the cotton net that we have, but once again they're not cotton, so that's a shame because these look perfect. Ideally, I would like to find something in between this thick net and the thinner net that I have used. The next big problem is that the starch got stuck in between the holes of the net, as you can see here. Again, that would probably be remedied by a larger sized netting, but also what I shouldn't have done is covered the net with another layer of starch as I was stretching it over Anne. But then probably it wouldn't be as stiff, but it's not that stiff anyway, so I've just had a thought. If the binding is stiff, it would help keep the shape of the foundation much better. So maybe if you add starch just to the extra binding rather than the whole of the foundation, those problems would all be solved. Okay, that's all the negatives done, but what I really liked and will definitely be doing again is making the starch stiffener with the dye bath water. I think the pink net turned out really magical. I wouldn't bother to try to pre-dye it though, as the colour just didn't take. Right, I bet you are all dying to know what happened to the lightweight buckram example, and here it is. I haven't taken it off a fan yet. I think it will be too stiff to use anyway. Apart from the stiffness, the biggest problem with the lightweight buckram is that it doesn't have as much stretch as the netting does, as you can see over here along my pin line. There are so many folds in the fabric and that just won't feel nice against your head. Oh, and because it's buckram, it will need a lining, whereas the blocking net doesn't tend to be lined, traditionally speaking. I'll just take it off now without marking in any of my cutting lines, as I want to reuse this for a different hat so that it doesn't go to waste. Yes, definitely too stiff for my liking. It's not got that flexibility that I would like for a fabric hat. In conclusion, let's hope we can get our hands onto professionally manufactured blocking net again in the near future. If you've enjoyed today's video, please like and subscribe. This really helps me grow and reach a larger audience. I hope you'll join me in the next month for actually using these foundations, when I'll also talk a little bit about the bias in millinery. For more hat-related content, you can follow me on Instagram at @ByIlonaMillinery. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye. Why yes, I did buy this lab coat just for this video. I'm going to use it as a bathrobe later.
Isn't that what your granddad does?
Yeah.